Sveicināti jaunieši, mani daži vārdi būs latviski, pēc tam pārējais process būs angļu valodā, un es ceru, ka mēs visā to tiksim galā. Tātad priecājos jūs šeit redzēt, un šodien mums ir tāda iespēja sadarbībā ar Vēlēšanu reformas biedrību, un biedrības priekšsēdētājs Valds Liepiņš ir. Man vēl jāsaka, deputāta kungs.
Vēl nē.
Jā, bet vēl tauta savu izvēlīs darīs, jā. Tātad līdz ar to es ceru, lekcijas formāts, mums šodien tikšanās formāts būs tāds, ka 45 minūtes būs tīrā lekcija, un pēc tam visi klātsoši ir aicināti uzdot gudrus jautājumus un gūt maksimumu, cik vien ir iespējams. Jā, un tagad vārds Valdam Liepiņam.
Paldies. Es runāšu angliski. Īsumā jūs neesat vēl iepazinušies ar Tada Halla. Viņš ir... I said I will speak English. I forgot. Okay. So Tada Halla is from the University of Utah, where he's the associate professor in the political science department. And he's also a research fellow in the Institute of Public and International Affairs. Both of those are connected with the University of Utah. He says, at least when I looked up Google, that he has geographical regions of interest. That's in the plural. But then when you follow up, it just says Estonia. So I think he has a hidden agenda that he wants to start up in Estonia, then move and take over Latvia, and then move and take over Lithuania. Is that right?
No.
More or less. Come on, no.
More or less.
More or less. More or less. Okay, without further to-do, his topic is the role of social media in the electoral process. Over to you, Thad.
Thank you. So actually, I have been now to all of the Baltic states. So Latvia was the last state I needed to visit, so I've now completed the Baltic trifecta. I'm very excited about this. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Utah, which is where the 2002 Winter Olympics were held. And I study the way we run elections, both in the US and internationally. I've written several books. I've written about how to investigate election fraud. I've written about internet voting, and I've written about electronic elections in the US, how we use voting machines. And so what I'm going to do today is to talk about some issues about social media and about voting, and talk a little bit about the experiences I have had in studying elections in Estonia, where they do internet voting. We have a lot of data from there. And then I'm going to stop toward the end and talk about the use of social media today, both in the United States, but also in the Middle East during the Arab Spring. Now let me ask you a question. Am I talking too fast, too slow, perfect? Is it all okay? Okay, good, all right. I teach Chinese students in the US sometimes, and they quickly get lost, and so I just want to make sure. So I'm going to start off just talking about this idea of a digital divide and access to the internet, because I think it's a very important issue. So if we look at data on internet penetration rates, and these are data that are about 2 years old, we see that Latvia has a very high level of internet access. Most, about almost 70% of the population has access to the internet. It's not that far behind the US, and we're behind the Germans. And access to the internet is, we're behind the Germans in a lot of things, but like economically, especially right now. But access to the internet, is kind of a fundamental thing you need to think about when you're going to think about using social media or using other tools, electronic tools, to communicate with the public or to allow people to do services online. And the big issue that you run into is this, is that there are basically two groups of people. There are the haves and the have-nots. So if you look at people who are online in the United States, they tend to be richer, they're better educated, they tend to be younger. So all of you, you wouldn't know what to do without a cell phone or things like that. And, my mother can barely operate a phone, right? A cell phone. So, there's this issue of haves and have-nots. But The other thing, though, is this, is even if you get internet, so this is a divide that exists just between people who do and do not have internet access. But even if I give you internet access, it's the wealthy and the better educated who are the people who use these services much more often. So one of the things that we have to keep in mind when we think about social media is that there's this big divide between haves and have-nots. And so one of the things that can happen if we don't consider how this works is we can just make everything better off for wealthy, well-educated people. And I can advantage them over people who are poorer and people who don't have the same sort of educational skill set. And if we think about these divides, I was talking just here about education and income and things like this, but there's also other types of divides as well. There's the issue of people having mobile internet access. So my BlackBerry, I can access the internet on this. I can, do whatever I want online. And, having this little device gives me an advantage over people who just have an internet connection at home. I can stand in the line at the grocery store and I can, engage in a variety of activities. I can look at my Twitter feed and see what's going on. I can update my Facebook status, landed in Riga, giving a talk. I'll do it right now. No. And the other difference too is for people who live, who have internet access at home is the difference between having dial-up access and having high-speed access. And even if you have high-speed access, the level of high-speed access you have. So it's ironic, in America we actually have relatively poor high-speed access compared to other countries like in Japan and places like that where they have very fast internet connections. And so, the more internet connectivity I have, the more I can do. And so, at the outset, I just wanted to point out that there's this, this big issue, that cuts across, things like age, education, income that really create differences in how we think about the internet. And it's very important for all of you because you're all young. And so, when I was your age, there was no email. There was no internet. There were not smart cell phones. And so things that you all take for granted and think, oh, well, everybody can do this. Well, I was deprived when I was your age. I didn't have all this stuff. And I have a 9-year-old son, who one day told me he wanted one of these. He wants an iPhone. That's what he wants right now. He's 9. I'm like, no, you can't have an iPhone. But, I pointed out to him that at some point when he has a 9-year-old, they're going to have some cool thing that you can't even imagine, right? Because if you had told me when I was your age that I could have this and it would do all the things that it does, I would have told you you're crazy. This is something out of a science fiction movie. So what I want to do now is to talk a little bit about voting and voting technologies and how we think about voting, especially electronic voting. And part of this will draw on experiences both in the United States, where I've studied this, and also in Switzerland and in Estonia, where they do internet voting. And the first thing I want to point out is this, is that as a voter, in most countries in the world, you have a decision to make about how you're going to vote. There are people who vote in advance in person, and so many countries allow in-person advance voting. People can often vote in some remote way, so they can vote by mail. In places like Switzerland and Estonia, there are opportunities to vote on the internet. In some countries, you can, for instance, in the United Kingdom, you can proxy vote. So I can just tell somebody that I would like for them to vote for me. I tell them how I want them to vote, and they can do that for me. And obviously, you can vote on election day. So as a voter, you have this choice pattern. The one thing I want to point out, though, is that people talk about internet voting as something that'll make all of you young people want to vote. And technologies rarely motivate people to vote, right? Parties motivate people to vote. Issues motivate people to vote. Technologies don't. So I want to just point out, and I'm going to come back to that more, but I want to point out that just because we make it convenient for people to vote in different ways doesn't mean they're going to actually do it. Because something has to motivate you to actually vote on Sunday. You vote on Sunday, I assume? Saturday, sorry. We vote on Tuesday, which is the most inconvenient day in the world to vote. But if you think about, well, why do people want to have internet or electronic voting just generally? You know, one of the reasons is you can just count ballots faster. So I can scan ballots using an optical scanner. I can have people vote on a computer. I can total up the results very quickly. And political parties like this, because parties want to know immediately if they've won or lost. And the media wants to know. And the media are really annoying people who want to know right now, you know, who won, because they've got to fill up news space, right? And so one of the reasons to use electronic voting is for that. In America, it's especially important to have fast counting because we have very long ballots. So you just, how many of you voted in the last election? Okay. How many races were on the ballot? How many well, not candidates, but how many jobs were you electing people for? So, one? One. Just for one parliament seat. Okay. So when Right, okay. It's a list. How many people do you vote for on the list?
In Riga, it varies by the district.
Okay.
There's a list of 32.
Okay. And how many can you vote for?
You can put pluses and you can strike out names.
Wow.
As often as you want. You can
Okay.
nothing,
Hard job.
strike them all out, or a mixture, or you can untouch.
Okay, you need electronic voting because it'd make your lives a lot simpler. Because in the United States, what we have is, you know, we have one race where you have to do complicated things. We have 40 races. So I vote for a president, a United States senator, a United States representative, but then I vote for state candidates for a variety of offices. I vote for local candidates for a variety of offices. I vote on referenda and initiatives. So we have very long ballots. And what that means is they're really hard to count. The other thing is, you know, in the United States especially, but in other countries as well, you want to give people who have special needs, like people who are disabled or people who live overseas, the ability to vote too. And so one of the nice things about electronic voting is I can make it where somebody who's fully disabled can vote, because you can have what we would call adaptive technology. So I can make it where, you know, the ballot can be read to you if you're blind, and then you can vote. The other thing too, though, is you just want accuracy. So this is a very famous picture from the 2000 election in the United States where they couldn't count ballots in Florida. We had ballots in Florida where you had to stick they're punch cards, which I don't know if you guys have ever seen a punch card, but you basically take a pen and you shove it through a hole, and that's which candidate you're voting for. And it turns out that if you don't clean out the voting machine, it gets all those little pieces of Chad, thank you, in it. And it's like hole punching too many times, and the hole punch gets filled. And so it didn't punch all the way through, and so people had magnifying glasses out trying to figure out how people voted. With electronic voting, when I vote, the computer captures my vote. And so that's a very nice thing because I don't have to worry about some guy with a magnifying glass interpreting how I casted my ballot. And if you think about it in your context, thinking about, you know, the description of the way you all vote, you know, electronic voting would mean that it would be easy to know how people were, you know, what people's scratches and scribbles on the ballot meant. You know, when people were making pluses or minuses or scratching through candidates, that's something that has to be interpreted. And a computer can interpret things uniformly as opposed to people who are notoriously bad at interpreting things. And so that's a big issue, but there's a downside. And the downside is concerns about hacking. So people, you know, we all like computers, but we've all had computers crash. You know, you've been playing Xbox or, you know, your video games and they crash on you. And so people worry about hacking voting systems. You know, in Estonia, there's a big concern from one of the parties that's in the city of Tallinn, and they're very concerned about this issue of hacking of computers and hacking of the internet votes. And so that's a big issue. And you know, the reason why it's a big issue, and I'll come back to this in a little bit, is it goes to the issue of confidence. You know, we want to be confident in that the right candidates win, and if I can make people think that some sort of nefarious hacking happened, that, you know, people somehow got into the ballot box and changed all your votes, it's a problem. The other thing too is it involves computers, And most people don't understand how computers work. And so it's really easy for people to scare you because most people don't know exactly how computers operate. So if we look at if you look at voting in Estonia, you can see though that people really like internet voting. So people, this is looking at the percentage of people who are voting early. So in Estonia, you can vote early two ways. You either can vote on the internet or you can vote in person. And you can see that they've gone from about 30% of their population voting early in 2005 to over 40%. But you can look at the dramatic rise of people who are voting over the internet. It's almost 25% now that are voting, using the internet. And if you vote over the internet once, that's it. You're going to be an internet voter forever. Those people like voting on the internet a lot because it's really easy. There was some crazy woman in Estonia who voted, so you can vote as many times as you want to, and they only count your last vote. And she voted like 500 times. So she was really enjoying this whole logging in and voting thing. We're not really sure why. They ended up having to call her and tell her to stop it. But, people get real excited. And this actually is a trend that is very similar in the United States with early voting generally. People like to vote in the most convenient way possible. If I let you vote over multiple days, you all may be busy on Saturday, of the election, but you're probably not busy. You have some free time the week before. So if I let you vote early, I can do that. And so in the United States, we've had this big push toward early and absentee voting, voting by mail. Now, the key thing here, though, with voting is that I want people to be confident in the result. And so I want people to be satisfied in the voting process, and I want people to be confident that the right candidates won. Okay, I don't want to feel cheated. And there are a couple of things that affect people's attitudes toward confidence. One of them is winning. And you might think that's pretty obvious, but think about this. You hear people talk about election fraud. Note that winning candidates never claim there was fraud in the election. They're pretty positive that there was no fraud at all. Vladimir Putin is never going to say there was ballot box stuffing in Russia. He will just never say that, even though there's pretty good data on this. In fact, when he ran for his second term, there's a story that he told people not to engage in ballot box stuffing, and they did it anyway, and it kind of annoyed him. The other thing is the political context. So in the United States, we have winner-take-all elections. We have two parties. That's it. You either win or you lose. Here and in most of Europe, you have systems you have coalition governments. So that means that I can vote for the Green Party or some third party, and they may, even though they lose technically in the sense that they're not the number one vote getter, the party that gets the most votes, they can still be part of a coalition government. And so winning and losing is a little bit different. And so I may have confidence in the result even if my party doesn't win, whereas in the US, it's a lot easier to think something bad happened with the voting process as opposed to I just voted for a really lousy candidate, because most people don't want to admit they voted for a lousy candidate. The other thing, too, is there's a difference between how elites, so people in the media and things like that, view fraud and issues like that compared to regular people. And finally, the experience of voting matters a lot. So people who have really good voting experience, they go into a polling place, it works really well, they're all happy. Other people, who have bad experiences, they're less confident because they're pretty sure that some incompetent poll worker just messed up their ballot and won't be able to count how they marked it. So what I'm going to do now is kind of switch to this issue of how we use the internet in elections and in campaigns. And this will be something that where I can talk about a variety of things in the American context and other contexts. Americans tend to use a lot of these media, and then they get exported by all of our political consultants. So in addition to exporting Madonna and other music, we also export campaign tactics. And if you think about voting, you make a vote choice, but a couple of things feed into that. One of them is information. What do you know about the parties, the candidates, things like that? And then you have a personal ideology. You have some sort of bias toward what you like, what you don't like, Many of you get this from your parents, or you get it from some experience you had. But these things go into figuring out our vote choice. So when we think about voting, what we're trying to do with the internet is to figure out, how do I use social media, how do I use information technology to inform people's information choices? And how do I do that to inform your ideology? Because that's what I want to do. So as a party, parties want to influence these things on this side so that you make the right vote choice. So it's to vote for the right party. Now, when we think about this, it's kind of interesting to go back and to realize how recent a lot of these phenomena are. When we think about these social media technologies, they're very new. So blogging became a big thing in politics in 2004, in 2005. Internet voting starts in Estonia in 2005. There's Facebook and Twitter that get created in the latter part of the 2000s, and we see social media gain kind of critical mass during this time. So this means that there's enough people on Facebook and Twitter that it matters. So I don't know if you know this, but last week Facebook had this very big day for them because they had 500 million people on Facebook at the same time, which is pretty impressive. So, that's 500 million people on the planet. That's pretty good numbers. And, so how many of you are on Facebook? All right, there you go. How many of you use Twitter? All right. How many of you are tweeting this right now? Exactly. I'm really bored. Hope he shuts up soon. And then we see this explosion of social media worldwide start in 2009. So there's a lot of, when we think about the use of social media, if I'd given this talk 5 years ago, I would not have talked about Facebook. I wouldn't have talked about Twitter. They weren't big things in politics then. But they've become very big in the last several years. Now, there's an interesting aspect, though, about this. And there was an interesting talk I was just listening to. I flew here from Tallinn. There's a big conference on electronic government that's being held there this week. And so I left a little bit early so I could come see all of you. And so I could complete my Baltic trifecta of visiting all the countries. But one of the things we talked about this morning, I was on a panel where we were talking about the use of Facebook and Twitter. And in the United States, in the 2010 elections, so we had congressional elections in 2010 and federal elections, only 2% of the population actually uses Twitter for political purposes. So that's a very small part of the population. And so one of the things to remember about social media is they're very important, but they're not used for political purposes by a lot of people. In fact, only about 12% of the population, post things that are political on their Facebook pages or things like that. All right. So when we think about social media and the use of the internet in politics, there's kind of two things that are going on here. You can think about this as supply and demand. Parties and the media are pushing information to you, right? They're gonna, you can friend candidates online, and they'll push you information about voting and about their issues, and you're all thinking, I would never friend a political party on Facebook, but you can. It's possible. I'm friends with Barack Obama. Barack Obama sends me emails, and he posts things on my Facebook page. It's very exciting. Most of them involve giving him money, which I haven't done yet, but he's very much trying to get me to give him money. And then obviously the media is a very, another group of people that are pushing information out all the time. The media here, I'm sure they all have web pages. They're all sending you information. That information is out there for you to get. And sometimes you need information. You don't know who to vote for. You don't know something about one of the issues. So you're going to look for information. So you have this kind of collision that's going on between these two things. And in politics today, these things are very important. This use of the internet is very important. And it's important for one really big reason, which is another thing we were having a discussion about this morning at this conference, which is the media expect candidates to have these things. The media are a group of elites They work in a world today that is very much dominated by what's called new media, so they're posting stories online all the time. So a reporter 20 years ago could wander around for a day or two and write a story. Today, they may write a story and update it all day and write 2 other stories and post them online. There's a big desire on the part of media companies to have reporters push out as much media information as possible in stories. The internet is very important for reporters too, because that's where they can get a lot of information quickly. They can Google things. They can go on Twitter and see what people are saying. So it's kind of an important part of this. And so candidates have to, and parties have to take this in mind. And so this is the website of a guy who's running for the city council in Pasadena, California, which is right outside of Los Angeles. You know, this guy's running for this job. One of my friends is actually advising his campaigns. That's why I picked this. But you know, here's this guy. He's running for city council in a pretty small city, right? But the media kind of expect him to have a web page. So he has a web page. There's not a lot on it, but he has this web page. Although he has videos and events and endorsements and all that, you can do all that good stuff. And you can subscribe for updates, which you should all be doing. You know, don't you want to get information from your political parties? You know, and so this is kind of like an This is like I'm going to go back to that. It's like an online yard sign. So this is a party committee in here. Google Chrome, which is the Google, web browser. It translates things. So I could actually read this in English and understand what I was actually reading, which was like a blessing because my Latvian is horrible. In fact, I don't speak any Latvian at all. But this is a nice example of this. And the thing that was interesting to me when I pulled this up is, I pulled up this one and then I pulled up, this is like the English version of it, so I could actually figure out what was going on. So, you can donate money. You can join. They have things about candidates. You can contact them. But then this is what a party committee in the United States looks like. So this is the Republican Party. The GOP, it means the Grand Old Party. Their symbol is an elephant. I don't know why. One of our parties is elephants. One of them is donkeys. I can't explain that. It seems a little odd to me. But notice the same things, right? They have the same sort of issues, on their buttons on the top. Just like here. And the big button, of course, is to donate because they'd like you to do this. And, by the way, notice that you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter. You can just push a button right there. They're just happy to have you where they can send you more junk mail. And you can sign up for email alerts. And, why do they want your email? Because then they can find out everything they can possibly find out about you, and in addition to sending you junk mail. And so I just want to point out that, both here in Latvia and in the U.S., parties and committees are using the internet, for the same purpose, which is to communicate their issues, to people. So, in the United States, this is Barack Obama's website, who I'm friends with on Facebook. Did I mention that? And, notice that, notice the big thing on this, by the way, is, reasons to give. He wants people to give him money, and he wants people to get involved. But the other thing, too, that Obama is very famous for is in 2008, they used the internet to target really active people. In fact, a lot of them were people just like you, young college students who were really excited. They wanted change. They all hated George Bush. They wanted this new, young, energetic guy. So what they would do is this. They would email people who are part of their list, and they would say, I want you to have a meeting of people in your neighborhood. Invite people over and talk to them about the issues. Now, that's a really important thing because, even at the biggest, they have about 12 million email addresses, the Obama campaign does. And that's a lot, but, think about how much more valuable it is for me to be able to communicate with really active people. You have friends like this. You know that friend you have that's involved in everything and they're just always coming up to you and they're all gung-ho, you should get involved in this. This is great. Well, Obama found those people and got them to get other people really energized and activated. And this was a really key part of his campaign. And he was able to use Facebook and Twitter and online group meetings where you can have online meetings with people, online chats, to really get people motivated. And he also was very good at doing grassroots fundraising. So he raised hundreds of millions of dollars from regular people giving small amounts of money over the internet. So it was a very important tool for him. Now, to log on to this page, I had to give them my email address so he could send me junk mail. And I had to enter in my zip code. So he knows that I live in Utah, and now he can target me with very specific Utah sort of things. Now, the irony, of course, is that I live in a state that by about 70% to 30% is going to vote against Obama in 2012. So if he sends me anything, it's going to say, could you call people in Colorado, the state next to Utah, and get them to vote for us? Because he knows it's not going to work. But, again, you can subscribe to Twitter and Facebook. You can get emails. You can be involved in discussions. So Obama has been very effective in using social media in his work. In fact, he has held press conferences over Twitter where you could tweet him questions and he would answer them right there. I think it was him answering them. For all you know, it was his press secretary, but I'm guessing it was him because he's kind of a nerd. Now, people use social media for a lot of reasons. This is Newt Gingrich. He was a Speaker of the House in the United States. He's also a little nutty. He's from the state where I used to live in Atlanta, Georgia. And people use Twitter, though, to energize their base. And by base, I mean the people who are like the core supporters of that party. So if you're a Republican or you're a Newt Gingrich supporter, I can use Twitter and I can send out kind of, snarky. Do you guys know what snarky means? Do you? Snarky means kind of mean, spirited. So I can send snarky comments about Barack Obama using Twitter and kind of get people all excited. They'll be like, yeah, Newt Gingrich got Barack Obama today. Because they're bored in line at the grocery store and they've got their mobile phone out and they're looking at their Twitter feed. And so you can do this and really mobilize your base. And that's really helpful because I want people to be motivated because those people are important. They give money. They get active. They're the ones that hold meetings. I can also just keep people informed. This is Barack Obama's Facebook page. He has how many? Oh, yeah, he has 23 million friends, including me. So see, I'm not so special after all, am I? He has 23 million friends. So, you can keep people informed about what you're doing, where you're going. He sends me there's a quote of the day, and so what more could I want than to start my day on Facebook with a quote from my president? It's just exciting. And then I can find out, people who are, exciting. Then there's Sarah Palin. I don't know how many of you know who Sarah Palin is. She can see Russia from her house in Alaska, supposedly. She obviously is trying to sell her book, but she's another person who uses social media to energize her core supporters. And so she's using Facebook to do this. Newt Gingrich, uses Twitter, although they found out that he was paying people to be his friend on Twitter because he wanted it to look like he had a lot of followers for political reasons and he was paying people. So if some of your friends have lots of Twitter followers, be wary. They may be paying people to be their friend. And so she posts things, and she hates the regular media. So she hates big newspapers. And so she uses this to communicate directly to her supporters, where she basically says the media is evil, and all those bad things they say about me aren't true. And I am not her friend on Facebook, by the way. Then the other thing, though, is how we look for information. So this is a website called Politico. Politico is the biggest political website in the United States. It was started by a group of people who worked for some of the biggest news organizations in the country. They left and created their own online news source. So the nice thing about the internet is that in addition to looking at broad media, So in the United States, they'd be like the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times or the Chicago Tribune or USA Today. The USA Today is not bad. Don't dog USA Today. They have a great, crossword puzzle. I can go to specialized sites like Politico when I can learn about politics. And so the nice thing about the internet is it's really expanded the amount of media that we're able to ingest and the things that we're able to look at. And that's really helpful when we think about things. Now, there's something, though, that's more interesting that's a phenomenon in the U.S., and that's what we call news aggregation. And so there's a website called the Huffington Post. It was started by a very rich woman named Arianna Huffington, who is really rich and she's really liberal. And she wanted to create an online news source. And so if you go to her website, you can get all the news you need that's got a left of center bias to it. But I have their app on my iPhone or my BlackBerry. And but the nice thing is that I can get information from this website really quickly. They've aggregated news from all these other sources. So they find stories that are in the New York Times or that are in the Los Angeles Times that are in, Associated Press, and then they post them. And then they also post their own content. But what does this mean? This means that me, being a slightly liberal guy, I don't have to go and be exposed to conservative news if I don't want to. I can just go to the Huffington Post and I can get the news that fits my biases. Now that's good because it means I don't have to read, stuff that I want to read, but it also means that I'm not being exposed to the other side of the issues. So I'm only being exposed to issues that I care about from a position I care about and not to the alternate arguments. So this is one of the big issues with the internet is that you can use it to kind of gate yourself off from issues you don't care about or gate yourself off from ideas that you don't want to be exposed to. And that's a problem because, we need to be able to have dialogues about things. And so if I am using the Huffington Post, most of my friends are going to have views similar to me. I'm going to be on Twitter and follow people who are also have my same political bias. I'm just reinforcing these ideas. I'm not exposing myself to new things, and that's a big issue. The last thing I want to point out in this regard is the use of blogs. There's a very big blog in the U.S. called the Daily Kos. And blogs are actually becoming less and less used because people use news aggregation websites instead. So this used to be the way that you could get all your liberal news, but now people have these better news aggregation websites. Now, this woman, if she becomes president, you should all just build a bunker. Her name is Michelle Bachmann, and she's crazy. And she's just crazy. She's like she's super conservative in a weird way. But she is very much supported by these people called the Tea Party, which are people in the U.S. who hate government, but they like the government that they get. And so it's this very weird group. But, she's kind of their spokesperson. And, the nice thing about this group, the interesting thing about this group is that they have used the internet to mobilize people all over the country toward their conservative views. And, they're very effective in endorsing candidates, in sending out very specific media to people that support their viewpoints. And she's one of their people. They like her. And so, to actually get good stuff out of this website, by the way, you have to join their mailing list. And so this is all as far as I got. But, the nice thing about the internet is it lets groups like this, use social media to communicate. Now, how much do people use social media in the United States? Well, I can actually show you some data on this. So, 74% of Americans who are online, which is about half of all adults, get their election news and information online. So they're going online and looking up, things about candidates or issues like that. 26% of people are people like me who are following politics using their cell phone, their smartphone. And people under 30 are doing online politics and online political activity twice as much as people over 65. You know, so my mother, who's 81, she's very sweet. And, you know, I'm probably doing 10 times as much as she does. But, you know, she gets online and she can do things, but she can't do nearly as much as somebody who's younger can do. You know, we also see that small groups of people are using the internet for more geeky things. So they're getting emails from candidates and groups. This is me. You know, they're visiting Facebook and Twitter sites. They're telling people how they voted using their smartphone application for Facebook or Twitter. So they're like, I just voted. I'm so excited. Go vote. And then 10% of people are sending political text messages to their friends. Thank God none of those people are my friends. And again, you know, if we look at people who are internet users in the US, they tend to be people who are better educated. Democrats tend to use social media and use the internet more for politics than do Republicans. They tend to be activists. And they tend to be connected to a campaign by being on some sort of friend or email list. Now, I want to just talk really quickly for just a moment about the use of the internet in politics and give you a really specific example. So, you know, one of the things I was talking about is that you can use the internet for information seeking. So, the picture that's on the left, that's Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton's wife. She was running for president. She's now the Secretary of State. She was running against Barack Obama. So, you're a Democrat. You're trying to figure out how to vote. So you need to look up information, right? You want to find out about the candidates. But if you're a Democrat and a woman, how much information do you really need? Not so much. You're like, hey, that's me up there. That's Hillary Clinton. I'm a female and a Democrat. You know, I've got a lot of information right there because I already know that she believes in what I believe in and she looks like me. And if you're an African American and you're a Democrat, you're like, I'm on the Obama train. You know, I'm voting for Obama. Now, these are the Republican candidates in 2008. They're a bunch of white guys. They're a bunch of older white guys. They really are. There's like no diversity. They're just a bunch of older white guys. This time around, there's more diversity. But you can't just use, you're sort of like, okay, I got a bunch of white guys to choose from. So if you look at information seeking activities in voting for the primaries, elections in 2008, Democrats didn't do a lot of searching online because they had other cues that they could use. Republicans were searching all the time because they were like, who's the most conservative white guy out there? And so they had to do more information searching. So I've done work with a colleague where we had data on how people were using the internet all throughout the primary elections. So the elections that decided which candidates would win for each party. And you see Republicans doing a lot more searching than Democrats. The other thing I wanted to point out, too, is that, we should never discount the way, traditional media. We talk a lot about Facebook and Twitter, and we talk a lot about websites and the internet, but, most people get their news from television. They watch the TV news. TV news is easy. It's right there. I can watch whatever channels I want to watch. I can listen to stuff on the radio and listen to the news on the radio. I can read newspapers. Actually, those are like print, and I mean print newspapers. I'm sure that some of you have actually read a print newspaper and not just read it online, although I could be wrong. But the interesting thing is they did a survey in the US 2 weeks ago, and they asked people what was the most common way that they learned about local news. The number one answer was television. The number two answer was word of mouth. They learned about local news from their friends who told them stuff. So one of the things to remember, too, about information is that your friends are key people who communicate with you. They give you information. And, candidates and parties have to remember this, that their best allies, in fact, are your friends. So if I want to convince you to vote, the best thing I can do is to talk to you about it face to face. And the better you know somebody, the more convincing they are. So we do experiments in the US where we try to see what mobilizes people better. So we'll take a list of people who are registered voters in a given state or city, and we divide them in half. And half the people we call on the phone and say, you should go vote. And half the people we don't. And then we see who votes more. The people who got calls or people who didn't. Calling people, it's a little bit effective. Sending people mailers, not very effective. Going door to door and asking people personally to vote is very effective in boosting turnout. So if I want to boost turnout in elections, I can use all the social media I want, but what's really going to be effective is personal communication. Now, remember though, I can use social media to make this a lot easier. So if you work for, Barack Obama in 2008, his supporters had apps on their, I'm sure they'll have iPads now, but on their iPhones. So they could look up an address, and they knew if you voted, they knew what party registration you had, they have bought other information about you, because you can, in the US, you can buy, I know what magazine subscriptions you have. I know if you're a gun owner, or if you drive a Volvo, which means you're a safety freak, or you have a sports car. I can look up all that stuff, and then I can figure out how to target you. So they're using all sorts of data and using social media or using internet applications to try to figure out how to communicate with people best. The last thing I wanted to talk about, though, and I wanted to close with this, is to talk a little bit about the Arab Spring and to talk about the riots in London, because they're both interesting examples of the use of social media. And they're interesting for slightly different reasons. So let me start with the London riots first. You all read about the riots in London? You know how how a lot of the rioting in London was coordinated? Your BlackBerry. People were sending SMS messages, and they were using the BlackBerry chat feature, and they were like, cool, let's go looting. The Gap has stuff in your size, come quick. And so, social media was being used for very nefarious purposes, right? We're using it for not good reasons. Now, the Arab Spring is another example. So, this is the activities that have been going on in Tunisia and in Egypt and then in Libya. And people have talked about the fact that Facebook and Twitter were very important. But it turns out, if you look at data on Facebook and Twitter, about 0.5% of Egyptians have Twitter accounts, okay? 0.5%. So 99.5% of people, they're not using it. But the people who are using it are activists. They're people in the Muslim Brotherhood and other groups. And so what they did was they used social media to coordinate the elites. Then the elites went door to door and so they could coordinate using Twitter how they were going to divide up and what kind of messages they were going to use to communicate with people. And then they went door to door and got people to go to the square to protest. So it's a really effective way of using social media because they can use it to coordinate and things like that. The last thing I want to point out, though, is that social media can also be used for very bad reasons, in addition to the riots in London. And here a good example is the Iranian government. So in 2009, the Iranians had an election. There were claims that there was fraud in the election. People used social media to coordinate protests. And people took pictures and they posted videos online. And the government downloaded those pictures, downloaded those videos, scanned the pictures to figure out who they could find in the pictures that they knew, and then they went and arrested them. So you have to remember that social media can be good and bad. So if I know that you're friends with, people wanting to overthrow the totalitarian government, the totalitarian government may come and find you. And so it's a problem sometimes, how you use it. With that, I am done. This is some just information on, if you want to learn about elections in the US and in other countries, we post stuff online about research that we're doing. And I have a colleague who writes a blog about elections in the US. If you care, if the 2012 elections turn out to be insanely crazy, you can read about it there. But I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And I know that you're just all brimming with questions. You can tweet them to me, and I will answer them. But I hope you found this a little bit interesting, and if not, I'm still glad to be here in Riga. It's a really cool place. But if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And please feel free to ask me in Latvian, and then I can try to translate it. We'll figure it out, exactly. Yes. Do you want me to use the mic?
Microphone, I think.
Okay. Very good. I have no idea how to turn it on. So.
Hi, I'm Aniston, and I want to know, are you searching something about Baltic states? If we saw that in Estonia this internet voting is very high,
Right.
then how it's in Latvia and Lithuania? How you search that? Which level?
Sure. So, so I've been studying internet voting in Estonia since, just to give you a little bit of background, since 2006. So they started using it in 2005, and I've been involved in studies that were done by the Council of Europe since their 2007 elections. And the thing about Estonia that makes their internet voting work is that they have a really good legal framework for it. And kind of the key cornerstone to that framework is their digital identity cards. So prior to them even having internet voting, when they were creating their system for having identity cards, they built in a digital identity into them. So you can take your card, you put it into a smart reader, which costs like $8, that you hook onto your computer, you plug it in, and then you can authenticate yourself by having the card and a password, like a PIN. And under their law, that allows you to, it's like signing a document. And so it has the same legal standing as a document signed with a pen. And the key thing about it for them is that they use that digital identity for a variety of transactions. So if you engage in banking in Estonia, you use the same ID card. If you want to buy a bus ticket, you can buy it online. If you want to get a visa to go to a country that you need a visa for, you can do it that way. You want to renew your, a passport or something like that. All those things you can do online. And so for them, voting is just one part of a larger e-government solution that they have for their country. And they decided to do that for, pretty savvy reasons, right? So Estonia has 1.4 million people. It's pretty small. It's in the north of the Baltics. Not many people know about it, but everybody knows about their internet voting, so it gives them, it's kind of it's a status, right? Exactly. It's a way of kind of promoting themselves, so they can call themselves Estonia with a dash. And, but they've also expanded it to other areas. When I was at this conference that I was attending in Tallinn, one of the things that they were talking about, the president was talking about, how they're using it for, to improve business transactions. So you can actually engage in all sorts of transactions without ever interfacing with a human being to make things easier. So for them, the reason why their voting works really well is because of that. Now, Latvia has really cool online things too. You have an online petition system that's kind of world-renowned. In fact, the United States is adopting something like it, and they modeled it on your system. So, Latvia has really advanced things as well. But, for Estonia, the internet voting came later. It came after they had figured out this fundamental issue of how to authenticate people online. So how do I know you're you online? So that was kind of the key thing. And that was a really long answer, I know. Sorry.
Microphone.
Okay. Yes. I think you can just talk.
Hi, my name is Jayana. I wanted to ask, has the voter turnout in Estonia increased since establishing the internet voting?
No.
No.
No, not really. But let me address that, and I kind of mentioned that at the outset, which is that a technology like internet voting can't make people want to vote more. Okay, I can make it easier for you to vote, but I can't make you vote. And so one of the things to keep in mind about any kind of technology like internet voting is I can't make you vote, right? I mean, it can seem cool, and so like if you're the crazy lady I mentioned who, you know, voted a bazillion times, you can do that. But by and large, you know, people are voting for parties and candidates, and it's parties and candidates that are going to motivate people to vote. It's not being able to do it online. You might do it once because it's cool, but, you know, even that, I mean, you're not going to like go tell your friends, you know, guess what I did this morning? I voted online. You know, they're going to be like, you're a nerd. So, but the other thing though, you know, but let me answer your question a little bit more specifically, which is that we shouldn't think about overall turnout necessarily, okay? Because what I may care about is, can I enfranchise, can I bring into the voting population small subgroups of people who may not have been able to vote before? So for instance, if you live overseas, it may be really hard to get a ballot in time, a paper ballot, or go to an embassy to vote. You know, in fact, Estonia doesn't have embassies in every country in the world, right? Most countries don't have embassies in every country in the world. And so what internet voting may do is to enfranchise those people who are overseas, or it may enfranchise people who are who work 2 jobs, who couldn't be able to vote. And in fact, there is some data from the surveys that we've done that show that, you know, 2 or 3% of people are voting because there is internet voting, then they may not have been able to otherwise. But it's a really small effect because, you know, that's 2 or 3% of people in a very large pool of voters. And we're trying to draw something out of them from a survey, and it's pretty hard to do. But so the answer to your question is, you know, the technology can't make you vote. So, is there a question in the over here? So.
My question has to do with the American
elections. Hold on. If you could use the microphone so they're taping, recording. So.
My question. Push this.
I think so.
My question has to do with the American elections and the fact that all the politicians speak in English, but there's a huge Spanish population, particularly in the southern states.
Sure.
How do the Spanish-speaking get treated in the media and in the internet?
Sure, in voting in general. Okay, sure, that's a good question. So, the United States, as you all know, is a very diverse country. We have large populations of people who are Spanish, who speak Spanish. But in other cities, so in Los Angeles, they have large Chinese populations or Japanese populations. So in America, you know, to answer your question, there are 2 things that kind of intersect. One is there's a very large media for those populations. That's actually been a really big growth area in the media, is having Spanish-speaking media. So we have, you know, we have a channel called Telemundo and one called Univision, and they, you know, they have really good news coverage and things like that. They promote issues that affect people who are Spanish. And the same is true for other media. So in Los Angeles, there are newspapers and media for Koreans and Chinese and Japanese. So part of it, if you think about it from the information side, there is really good information that those people can get. And there are groups that target getting them information. But the other thing that we have in the United States is we have a law that was called the Voting Rights Act. So all of you may remember we used to discriminate against people who were black. We didn't let them vote. And they could legally vote, but we passed laws that made it really hard for them to vote. So we passed a law called the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And then in 1973, they amended the law. And one of the amendments they made was this. If there are 10,000 people in a jurisdiction, so in a city or a county, who all speak the same language primarily, and it's not English, you have to provide a ballot to them in their native language. Okay? So what this means is if you live in Miami, you can get ballots in Spanish and in English. It means if you live in Los Angeles, you can get ballots in Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Tagalog, which is Filipino, and English. So they have to do ballots in 7 different languages. And they have to have translators. So you can think about how this works. So, you know, so this is the flip side. This is the fun thing about being an American, right? So when you're an American, you view everything through this American context, right? So we do these surveys in Estonia. Who do you think uses the internet the least in Estonia? What group of people? Actually, old people, assuming they have access, will use it at a pretty high rate. What subpopulation of people in Estonia don't use it? Who said that? Yes, we have a winner in the back. It's the Russian speakers, right? People who native language is Russian, who may not be able to speak Estonian, which is a really hard language to speak, by the way, because I've tried to learn about 5 words, and they have you have umlauts and things like that, and we don't have dots and dashes over letters. So it's very confusing. So the Russian speakers don't use it because they don't understand the internet interface necessarily. So we bring this up to the Estonians. We're like, in America we would do this we would do this in other languages, and that did not go over well with the Estonians. They were not really into the idea of doing this in Russian too. It's just kind of interesting kind of cultural issue of how you think about ballots in other countries. And obviously, Estonia has a really different history than we do. And so, in Latvia, it's the same way. But did that answer your question?
Well, like when Hillary Clinton goes to California, does she speak Chinese or
she speaks Spanish. Everybody learns a little Spanish. It never hurts. See, if I had been smart, I would have learned a little bit of, Latvian, and I would have been able to come in and say 2 sentences in Latvian, and you all would have applauded. But instead, I'm just going to speak English because I'm an American, and that's what we do. But yeah, so Barack Obama speaks in Spanish. He has Spanish web pages. Yes, they do all of that. So I can be my own MC. Sure.
I am old enough to become conservative.
Okay.
On the other hand, I use internet too. But when I go to vote,
right.
and I'm in small cabin when I fulfill my ballot.
Right.
And then I am sure that nobody will know what I did. Yes?
Okay.
And in our system, you also can have all other lists, yes, and in order to show to your employer and to say, yes,
right.
please, all what you have, yes.
Right.
But what kind of guarantee do I have when it's internet voting?
Okay.
Can I be sure that somebody will not calculate what I'm doing? Like when Obama sends you, and they know all what is necessary. Only
right.
you have just to show this place from where you plug in.
Right. Okay. So that's a really good question. So I'm gonna make the question a little bit specific. So how do I know that 2 things? How do I know my ballot was counted? And how do I know that the ballot was secret? Okay. So in America, up until like 1870, we didn't have secret ballots. So you'd go into a polling place and they'd give you a ballot that was white, or they'd give you a ballot that was, except they were brighter colors. And why did we do this? Because parties printed ballots, not some government. And the cool thing though was this is what you guys will love. If ballots are colored, I can sell my vote because people from the party can know that I voted the right way, and you could get shoes for that, or a bottle of vodka, or although in America it was not vodka, it was probably like a bottle of scotch. But yeah, you could sell your vote for stuff. And it turns out when we went to having a secret ballot, turnout plummeted. It went down like a fair amount. So if you can engage in vote buying and vote selling, turnout will increase. I'm not promoting that. I'm just pointing out that it's something that happens because you can get stuff. And we all like stuff, But so we have secret ballots. Now secret ballots create a problem. So think about going to your bank, going to the ATM and getting money out, okay? So you put in your card, you want, all right, you're in Europe and you want 40 euros. So you get 20 euros, okay? But the receipt comes out and says you got 40 euros. So how do you prove that you only got 20? Well, there's a couple of ways. One is they can count the money in the machine. The other thing too is there's a video camera there that's watching the transaction for security reasons. It's going to show how much money came out of the machine probably. There are other audits that can be done for the machines that'll tell them that it didn't dispense the right amount of money. So you can get your money back. But the reason why you can get your money back is that your transaction was not secret. Your transaction was a public transaction between you and the bank. So let's take his ballot. So he gets his ballot on election day. And he marks his ballot. okay? And so he's conservative. He votes for all the conservative people, votes against all the liberal people, okay? So he does this and he puts it in the ballot box. Now, can he be sure that his vote is going to get counted? So you could say yes, because he can sit there all night until the end of the election, and there are nerdy people who do this, and he can watch them dump all the ballots out, and he can watch them count the number of ballots and see that it matches the number of people who voted that day. So he knows that there are 500 people who voted and there are 500 ballots. So he's like, cool, my ballot is in there. Rock on. But here's the problem. Who counts the ballots? A bunch of old people in the US. And I'm not sure here, but it's probably, you know, middle-aged people and some old people. And they count the ballots, okay? So they're putting them in stacks and they're counting them. Well, what do people do when they count things? They make mistakes. They put the ballot in the wrong pile. You know, I have lousy handwriting, so they can't figure out if I plussed or minused something. They can't figure out if my circle means I like something or if I was scratching out the candidates above and below. You know, so part of the problem is with voting is that my ballot has to be interpreted. Does that make sense? So when you vote, somebody's interpreting your ballot. And either it's a person or it's a machine. So in America, you know, my ballot is being interpreted by some machine that's looking at my ballot and seeing if I filled in a dot, a bubble, like on a standardized test, I might have a bubble next to a candidate's name. Or it's seeing if I pushed the right button for a candidate. So I have electronic voting. I push buttons next to candidates' names on a screen. So you have to think about that. So one thing would be, you can know your ballot's in the box, but you can't know that it's, you know, you can't know that it got counted correctly. So that's always the problem. The other thing, though, is the issue of secrecy. And that's a big issue with internet voting. Is the question is, can I intercept your internet connection and figure out how you voted? Or can I unencrypt ballots? So figure out how you voted. And that's a very big controversial issue. And the question is, and the problem is I can't audit it. I can't go, so if I have a question about the ballots in a polling place, I can just recount the ballots. I can get 100 people in a room and we can all pour over the ballots. But electronic votes, especially internet votes, you can't do that with. You can't create some sort of log or audit record that I can go back to. So that's a big problem. And so what you have to do is trust the system. So the Estonians trust their system, by and large. You know, but if anything bad ever happened, it's over. Like, you know, the first time somebody claims that they've hacked that machine, it's a big issue. So.
But somebody did hack the Estonian system. They still trust it as much
They claim to, and they had a weird ballot in the last election. But by and large, people still trust their system. They have a very high level of trust. So in the survey data we have, people trust their system a lot.
What was that one exception?
They don't know, because they never went back and decrypted it. But there was a problem with one of the ballots. It's the first time this has happened, that there was a problem with one of the ballots. But they never figured out what the problem was. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
They don't, I have.
Oh, there's people in the back. So where's the microphone? Oh, it's up here, okay. Can you pass it back? Raise your hand again? Okay.
Okay, so my question is quite technical about the Estonian voting system.
Great.
Maybe you know, did all the programs necessary for the system, did the Estonians make themselves, or did they, I don't know, employ some other computer geeks to do that for them?
Well,
not computer geeks, cancel that out, but well, did they, I don't know.
There were computer geeks involved. I've met the people. They're kind of geeky.
Yeah, but were they Estonians? Did the Estonians make their system
they were
themselves,
Estonian. Yeah, it was the government contracted with an Estonian firm to make the system.
Oh, so it's completely self-made.
Yes.
Oh,
And
nice.
the people who were involved in making it were also linked to the people who had done the digital ID system. So there was a good linkage, you know, with the technology, so that they could make the voting system link really well with the digital identity. So yeah, so it's an Estonian company, and you know the government obviously oversees it, and so that's how they did it.
Nice.
Okay, sure. See, I can even give a short answer if I have to. So there's a question in the back, like 2 rows back.
I wanted to know whether there is a way to properly measure the effects of the electronic media on the voting results.
So by that, wait, keep the microphone. So by that you mean, how do I determine how social media that you're exposed to affects your voting?
Yes.
Okay.
Or research papers.
Sure. No. So I can do that through survey research. It's kind of hard, but I can do surveys, to see what kind of media you look at. So one of the big issues, and there's not really good data about this. So if you did a survey here, you would have really unique data. But the thing that you'd want to look at would be, how do people communicate using social media? Are they looking at media that are all the same? Are they exposing themselves to different ideas? And then, how does that mobilize people to go out and vote? And so, we can ask questions about that, but it's something that's not been done very effectively. And in fact, I'm working with some people right now in America to try to do a survey like that. We're really trying to look at how do people use Facebook for political purposes? How do people really use Twitter for political purposes? And try to tease out, how much does that motivate you to go vote or not vote? And how are people who are really motivated using it to motivate not so motivated people to vote, right? So you may be like a really election politics person, and how do I get you to get the people in front of you who don't care about politics to vote? So, yes, anybody else? If there are more questions in the back, in the middle? If not, there's a question in the front, so if you can pass it down. This is quite a steep room, by the way. There's a lot of steps.
A question about the inaction. How much time would be needed to implement the e-voting system in Latvia?
How much? Okay.
Well, how much? By time, I mean years.
Sure. No, I understand. So you'd have to handle a couple of issues. One is you'd have to handle the issue of how you're going to give people digital identities. So in Estonia, they use these government-issued smart cards. In Switzerland, they issue people temporary passwords and PINs through the mail. So you'd have to come up with a system to do that. You'd have to come up with some sort of, you'd have to select a voting system. And you'd probably have to pilot test it somewhere in the country. So you wouldn't use it in like a presidential election. So about a month ago, the Norwegians voted online for the first time. They had a huge use of the internet among people who advance vote, so voted before the election. And they pilot tested that in a small number of jurisdictions. So like Oslo wasn't one of them. And they tested to see how it worked, and they did a lot of research to try to see what the effects of the system were, on people's behaviors. But they worked on that system for probably 2 years before they implemented it. So it'd probably take 2 or 4 years to do it really effectively. And you'd have to pilot test it, and then you could do it in a bigger election.
I have a number of things. One is I think you should continue the story about the Estonian lady.
Okay.
As to when she had breakfast, lunch, dinner, when she went to the toilet.
She voted at 4 in the morning, okay? She voted in the middle of the night sometimes just to do this. So yeah, she was kind of crazy.
This use of the Twitter and Facebook in the States, do you have any data about use of Twitter and Facebook in politics, say in Europe or some other country?
There aren't as good of survey data in Europe and other countries on some of this. So the United States is kind of unique in that we do tons of surveys, and we have a group there that do surveys basically every month on internet use in society, and they always ask these questions about Twitter or Facebook. So we have really good data on that. It's harder to get data like that from Europe because surveys are so expensive to implement in Europe because you have to do them, there have to be multiple languages and things like that. But I can tell you, from this survey there was some survey data this morning we were looking at about, Facebook and Twitter use in the countries of the Middle East. And it's really low. I mean, it's less than 1%. And so in the United States, Facebook and Twitter use, for political reasons, is less than 10%. So it's a really small part of the population there. So I would imagine it's pretty similar or slightly lower in Europe.
And then I think you said that the Democrats were more likely to use Twitter and Facebook and social media. I presume they were also younger, because the young people were the ones who got excited about Obama.
Right, and they are younger, and that is something where the Republicans are catching up, because obviously, people have to, political parties, it's like a war, right? And so, once somebody figures out how to do something, the other side has to figure out how to do it as well. And so you have seen a big pickup of that. And, after the 2008 election, with these Tea Party voters who are people who are very conservative, they've really used the internet effectively. And so, that started to, that gap is closed quite a bit. There's a question behind you too when you're, okay, sure.
My last question was, could Obama do it again?
Could he win again?
No.
Oh.
Use the social media the same way. If other people are starting to use it, would they not get fed up and get a real turnout?
Well, so one of the things you see are that other politicians do use social media. The difference is that, Barack Obama has, 12 million friends on Facebook. He has 1 million people following him on Twitter. The Republican candidates for office right now have less than 100,000 people following them. So there's a big scale difference. So that's one thing. Two is, and here's the interesting question, is in 2012, what will be the new thing, right? What will be the new super cool way of communicating with people? Will it be Google Plus? Will it be, some other, somebody said no, I like that. They just opened it up to everybody. You can all get on it now. What kind of tool will it be that'll motivate people to vote? And so that's kind of a big question is like, what's the new innovation, and will Obama be able to figure out what that is? But I think, he does have this very strong infrastructure for using social media and really knows how to do it. But you're right, other people will try to mimic that. So there's a question right there.
Yes, my question is about the social sites. You mentioned Facebook and Twitter,
right?
But
sure.
What about YouTube, for instance?
So YouTube, is something that is really important. So if you think about, the Arab Spring, for instance, the Arab Spring started when, a young man caught himself on fire after being treated rudely and harshly by a government official in Tunisia, and his mother did this very poignant talk about him that was filmed using an iPhone, and then it was posted online. And it was then picked up by Al Jazeera and went viral. So if you think about the internet and YouTube, one of the nice things about YouTube is you can post these things for free, and you can hope they go viral. And so if you're especially among interest groups, they'll do commercials. And it's pretty cheap to make a commercial. It's real expensive to pay to get it put on television. So what they'll do is they'll make a commercial and they'll put it on YouTube, and then they'll get the media to cover it for them for free. Because they'll get CNN or Al Jazeera or somebody to show the ad for them. It's free, and they get all this free media from it. So you're absolutely right. YouTube is a very powerful tool in that regard. Because you're hoping that something will go viral and be really big. The other thing that they've done historically is, and this is like a big thing right now, is they follow candidates around with camcorders or mobile phones, and they're just waiting for them to say something stupid, right? And then they take that stupid clip and then they post it everywhere, including on YouTube, to try to make it where, I can gotcha you. I can say, oh, look, he said something stupid, which we all do all the time, right? But, now I can capture it and put it on YouTube. So you're absolutely right. And, the nice thing about YouTube is I have video evidence that you're an idiot, as opposed to just sort of anecdotal evidence. You know, I can see it in context. And in fact, in 2006, there was a Senate candidate who basically used a term that can be viewed as a racial slur, and it got posted on YouTube and went viral, and he lost the election. So these things can definitely happen. Yes, ma'am?
Well, my question is kind of continuing something about their question.
Yeah. If you ask me about MySpace, I'll tell you nobody's on MySpace.
Yeah, something about this, but maybe about Skype and MSN.
Okay.
So what's the connection? Do they kind of use it in political campaigns? Somehow, I don't know what's the connection. Maybe there is, so maybe you could explain it.
Well, so it's not used the same because, you know, Skype is like a one-to-one messaging service, and what I want is a one-to-many messaging service. You know, it is used obviously, for communicating among people, you know, in organizations, but it's much less used, you know, in that same way. The nice thing though about Skype, you know, is, you know, you can communicate with your friends through your status or whatever on Skype, you know, to try to send information, but it's not something that's used a lot in that regard.
Okay, so politicians don't use it?
Not really. It's not used very much, but I use it all the time because it's just a cool thing. But exactly, it's the cheap way to stay in touch. There's a question in the back. And as it goes through your hands, if you want to ask a question, you know, go for it. I've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to give a 10-minute answer to this question, so it better be good.
Well, I have one tiny question.
That's not going to do 10 minutes, but go.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
How can a government ensure that there cannot be possibility to sell the votes, and how can we avoid of buying my vote?
Okay. All right, so vote buying and vote selling it's an issue with any kind of voting system where you're not voting in a polling place. So if you vote in a polling place, you know, I can make sure that there's nobody with you when you cast your ballot. I can make sure it's a private process, that you put the ballot in the ballot box where it can't be seen. Pretty straightforward. But the moment I have remote voting, so if I let people vote absentee, using a paper ballot and then mailing it back in, if I let people vote from home on the internet, you know, then I open up people to two problems. One is coercion, so that's where your girlfriend makes you vote the way she wants you to, or you sell your vote because somebody offers you money and then they push the cast ballot button for you on the internet, or they take your absentee ballot and they post it in the mail for you. And so anytime I take voting out of a polling place, you know, be it electronic, you know, internet voting or some sort of by mail voting, I have this possibility for coercion, and I have a possibility for vote selling. And in fact, that was a big issue in that's a big thing they're going to be studying in the Norwegian elections using the internet, because they have they had a concern about what they call family voting, which is kind of like everybody sits around and they all vote together, you know. And so that's one of the things that they're going to study is and you can look at, and so the cool thing though about studying that with the internet is I can look if everybody voted in the family in like 10 minutes, right? Which would suggest that maybe the same person did it, you know, voted for everybody. It was like, give me your pens, I'm going to go vote for everybody. And so that's something they were concerned about. All right, there's a question in the front, so if you can cross over the aisle and down. Perfect.
I've got another question. You said something about Madonna, for instance. How can that affect politics or anything like that?
Oh, that's a really good question. Because because celebrities get involved in politics, you know, all the time, right? They endorse candidates and things like that. In general, they have a pretty small effect. Where they have a big effect, though, can be in fundraising. So if a candidate, so for instance, if a candidate like Barack Obama had a fundraiser the other day and Lady Gaga performed, right? So did you predict the Lady Gaga? There you go. Like Lady Gaga was performing. So, you know, it was a way of him raising money. But it doesn't affect the way people are going to vote necessarily. But you do get the cool money part, which is part of what candidates in America really want, is they want a lot of money so they can run more ads. But by and large, celebrity endorsements are not really important. Endorsements in general aren't really important, necessarily. They may be more important here, but in America, they're not super important.
Any more questions? This is your final chance. Except if you come in the evening at 5:30 to the EU house, then you can ask more questions, and that will be specifically on electronic voting. One question that I didn't ask, but I'll ask later, is your summing up the pluses and the minuses of electronic voting. And then also you'll have a chance to speak to Mr. Cimders, who has devised a different system. It's not electronic voting, but a very sensible system. And I'm sure you'd like to hear about that. And I'm sure he will also say something about it in this round table discussion that we'll have. So I'd like to thank you very much for coming, but as always, I'll give the last word to Jūtas.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate both of you inviting me here.
Welcome.
And I'm very much enjoying being in your country, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to speak to all of you.
He's been here for about 3.5 hours.
Yes, and I'm loving every minute of it.
I would like to thank you on behalf of faculty for coming here,
Certainly.
and I hope to see you again.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you. Exactly. Well, it's 6 a.m. for me, I was realizing, or 7 a.m. for me, so it's all...